The elevator music had been playing the same 8-bar loop for 47 minutes, and Marcus Chen was beginning to think the universe had a particularly cruel sense of humor. Here he was, vice president of operations at Meridian Financial Holdings, trapped between floors 19 and 20 with a janitor who smelled faintly of industrial disinfectant and wore a uniform that had seen better decades. The man sat quietly in the corner, his weathered hands folded over a mop bucket that had probably been white once upon a time, now a disconcerting shade of institutional gray. "This is absolutely ridiculous," Marcus muttered, adjusting his Armani tie for the dozenth time and glancing at his Rolex Submariner. The gleaming watch face reflected the harsh fluorescent light back at him, reminding him that he was already 23 minutes late for the quarterly board meeting where he was supposed to present his proposal for the downtown renovation project. 47 floors below them, millions of dollars in deals were presumably grinding to a halt while he remained imprisoned with the building's most invisible employee. The janitor, whose name tag read Henry in faded blue lettering, seemed entirely unbothered by their predicament. He sat with the patient stillness of someone who had witnessed countless minor catastrophes and understood that panic served no purpose. His dark eyes, Marcus noticed with growing irritation, held a quiet intelligence that seemed somehow inappropriate for a man whose job involved mopping floors and emptying waste paper baskets. "Don't you have somewhere important to be?" Marcus snapped, his voice echoing slightly in the confined space. "I mean, shouldn't you be cleaning something?" Henry's response was a barely perceptible shrug, followed by a gentle observation delivered in a voice that carried the slight trace of an accent Marcus couldn't quite place. "Time moves the same speed for everyone, sir. Whether we are in here or out there." The philosophical nature of the response only served to irritate Marcus further. Here was a man who probably made minimum wage offering life wisdom as if he was some sort of sage rather than someone whose most complex decision of the day involved which toilet paper to order. Marcus pulled out his iPhone, noted the complete absence of signal bars, and felt his carefully constructed morning spiraling further into chaos. "Look, Henry," Marcus said, his tone carrying the dismissive authority he typically reserved for incompetent subordinates, "I don't need your Eastern philosophy right now. I need to get out of this box and back to my life. Some of us have real responsibilities." The words hung in the air like smoke, and Marcus immediately felt a twinge of something he couldn't quite identify. It wasn't guilt, exactly, because guilt would require acknowledging that Henry deserved better treatment, and Marcus had spent too many years climbing the corporate ladder to waste time on such considerations. It was more like the uncomfortable recognition that he'd revealed something unseemly about himself to someone whose opinion shouldn't matter but somehow did. Henry's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes, a barely perceptible deepening that suggested Marcus had just confirmed something the older man had long suspected about the building's executive class. "Of course, sir," Henry said quietly. "Real responsibilities." The emergency intercom crackled to life with a burst of static that made both men jump. "This is building maintenance," came a tinny voice. "We are aware of the situation in elevator car 3. Technical team is en route. Estimated repair time is 90 minutes. Please remain calm and wait for further instructions." Marcus felt his carefully maintained composure crack like ice under pressure. 90 minutes. The board meeting would be long over. His presentation, months in the making, would be delivered by his ambitious assistant Janet, who would undoubtedly take full credit for his work while expressing deep concern about Marcus's reliability. The downtown renovation project, his ticket to senior vice president, would slip through his fingers while he sat trapped with a janitor who apparently believed in accepting fate with Buddhist-like serenity. 90 minutes, Marcus repeated, his voice hollow with disbelief. 90 goddamn minutes. Language like that won't make the time pass any faster, Henry observed mildly, producing a worn paperback from his uniform pocket. The cover was so creased and faded that Marcus couldn't make out the title, but he could see it was some sort of biography. Of course the janitor would read biographies. Probably self-improvement garbage about positive thinking and finding meaning in menial labor. "What gives you the right to lecture me about language?" Marcus demanded, his frustration finally boiling over. "You're a janitor. You push a mop around and empty trash cans. You don't get to judge how I handle stress. Henry looked up from his book, and for a moment, Marcus caught something in the older man's expression that was neither hurt nor anger but something far more unsettling, a pity. "You're right," Henry said simply. "I'm just the janitor." The way he said it, with such quiet acceptance, somehow made Marcus feel smaller than if Henry had fought back. It was the tone of someone who had heard worse insults and had long ago stopped taking them personally. It was the voice of a man who understood exactly where he stood in the building's hierarchy and had made his peace with it. Marcus found himself studying Henry more closely, taking in details he'd never bothered to notice during their brief encounters in hallways and lobbies. The janitor was probably in his early 60s, with salt and pepper hair that was thinning but well kept, and hands that told the story of decades of physical labor. His uniform was clean and pressed, despite its obvious age, and his work boots were scuffed but polished. There was a dignity in his presentation that seemed at odds with his menial position. "How long have you worked here?" Marcus asked, surprised by his own curiosity. 27 years come December," Henry replied, not looking up from his book. "Started when this building was brand new. Watched a lot of people come and go. 27 years. Marcus tried to wrap his mind around the concept of spending nearly 3 decades cleaning the same hallways, mopping the same floors, emptying the same waste paper baskets. The thought filled him with a mixture of bewilderment and something that might have been respect if he'd allowed himself to acknowledge it. He'd been with Meridian Financial for only 5 years, and already he was plotting his next move up the ladder. "That's a long time," Marcus said, attempting something that might pass for conversation. "Time enough to see this building change," Henry agreed. "New companies coming in, old ones going out. New faces in expensive suits, thinking they're going to conquer the world." There was no judgment in Henry's voice, just observation, but Marcus felt the implied criticism nonetheless. He was just another face in an expensive suit, another ambitious climber who would eventually move on to bigger and better things, leaving barely a ripple in the building's daily rhythm. The elevator shuddered slightly, as if the repair crew had begun their work, but the car remained stationary between floors. Marcus checked his phone again, noted that it was now 9:47 a.m., and felt another wave of anxiety wash over him. By now, the board members would have moved on to other agenda items. His carefully prepared slides would sit unopened on his laptop while Janet smoothly explained his absence and volunteered to step in. "You know what the worst part is?" Marcus said, more to himself than to Henry. "I've been working on this presentation for months. Market research, financial projections, architectural consultations. The downtown renovation could be worth $50 million to the company, and now I'm going to miss my chance to present it because of a broken elevator." $50 million is a lot of money, Henry acknowledged. "It's about more than money," Marcus continued, his voice gaining intensity as he warmed to the subject. "It's about vision. About taking something old and forgotten and making it relevant again. The downtown district has been dying for years, all those beautiful old buildings just sitting empty while everyone moves to the suburbs. But with the right investment, the right planning, we could bring it back to life." For the first time since they'd been trapped together, Henry set down his book and gave Marcus his full attention. "Tell me about these buildings," he said. Marcus found himself describing his vision in detail, painting a picture of renovated storefronts and bustling pedestrian areas, of converted lofts and thriving businesses. He talked about preserving architectural heritage while incorporating modern amenities, about creating spaces where history and progress could coexist. As he spoke, he realized that this was the first time in months that he'd discussed the project without focusing primarily on profit margins and return on investment. He was talking about it the way he'd originally conceived it, as something beautiful and worthwhile. Henry listened intently, occasionally asking questions that revealed a surprisingly sophisticated understanding of urban development. He inquired about zoning regulations and historical preservation requirements, about infrastructure needs and community impact. His questions were thoughtful and informed, causing Marcus to reconsider some of his assumptions and think more deeply about certain aspects of the project. You seem to know a lot about real estate for a janitor, Marcus observed, his tone more curious than condescending. You pick things up, Henry replied with a slight smile. 27 years of cleaning offices, you hear a lot of conversations. People talk around janitors like we're furniture. Sometimes you learn interesting things. There was something in Henry's tone that suggested hidden depths, but before Marcus could explore the subject further, the elevator lurched slightly and then began to move. Both men felt their ears pop as the car descended slowly to the 19th floor, where the doors opened to reveal a crew of maintenance workers with their tools and equipment. Sorry about that, folks, the lead technician said. Cable tension sensor went haywire. Should be good as new now. Marcus stepped out of the elevator with a mixture of relief and disappointment he couldn't quite explain. His conversation with Henry had been unexpectedly engaging, and he found himself reluctant to return to the familiar rhythms of executive life. But duty called, and he had damage control to perform. Thanks for the conversation, Henry, Marcus said, extending his hand. And sorry about earlier. The stress, you know. Henry's handshake was firm and warm. No offense taken, Mr. Chen. Good luck with your presentation. Marcus hurried toward the conference room, his mind racing as he tried to formulate an explanation for his absence that wouldn't make him sound completely unreliable. But as he reached for the door handle, he heard Janet's voice from within, delivering what sounded remarkably like his own presentation with minor modifications. As you can see from these projections, Janet was saying, the downtown renovation represents a tremendous opportunity for Meridian Financial. My preliminary research suggests we could see returns of 15 to 20% within the first 3 years. 15 to 20%. Marcus's actual projections had been more conservative, based on thorough market analysis rather than wishful thinking. Janet was overselling the project, promising returns that might not materialize and setting up the company for potential disappointment. But the board members were nodding appreciatively, clearly impressed by her confidence and apparent expertise. Marcus stood frozen outside the conference room door, watching through the glass as his career ambitions played out without him. He could enter now, interrupt Janet's presentation, and try to reclaim control of his project. But doing so would look desperate and unprofessional, and would likely result in an awkward confrontation that would reflect poorly on both of them. Instead, he found himself turning away from the conference room and walking back toward the elevator. His phone buzzed with a text from Janet, covering your presentation. Hope everything's okay. Let's talk later. The message was professionally worded, but Marcus could read between the lines. Janet was making her move, positioning herself as the reliable team player who could step up when needed. By the time he tried to correct the record, she would have already claimed ownership of the downtown renovation project and taken credit for securing the board's approval. Marcus rode the elevator down to the lobby, his mind churning with frustration and anger. 27 floors of descent gave him time to catalogue his grievances and plan his counterattack. He would schedule a meeting with the board chairman, set the record straight about who had originated the downtown renovation concept. He would present his original, more realistic financial projections and explain why Janet's numbers were dangerously optimistic. He would fight for what was rightfully his. But as the elevator doors opened into the marble-clad lobby, Marcus caught sight of Henry methodically mopping the floor near the information desk. The janitor worked with quiet efficiency, his movements economical and practiced. He had returned to his routine as if the morning's conversation had never happened, but something in his posture suggested he was aware of Marcus's presence. How did the presentation go? Henry asked without looking up from his work. It didn't, Marcus replied, surprised by his own honesty. My assistant took over when I didn't show up. Probably did me out of a promotion in the process. Henry straightened up, leaning on his mop handle. I'm sorry to hear that. Your ideas sounded solid. Solid ideas don't matter much if you're not there to present them, Marcus said bitterly. This business is all about timing and positioning. Miss your moment, and someone else takes your place. Maybe, Henry said thoughtfully. But good ideas have a way of surviving, even when they get stolen. The truth usually comes out eventually. Marcus wanted to argue the point, to explain that corporate politics were more complicated than Henry's simple worldview could accommodate. But something in the older man's expression suggested he understood more about power dynamics than his position would indicate. There was a knowing look in his eyes, as if he'd witnessed similar scenarios play out many times before. "You talk like you've seen this kind of thing before," Marcus observed. "In my line of work, you see everything eventually," Henry replied. "People think janitors are invisible, so they don't bother hiding their true nature around us. I've watched plenty of good people get passed over for promotions they deserved, seen mediocre employees take credit for other people's work. It's not right, but it happens." "So what's your advice?" Marcus asked, half joking. "How does the Invisible Man recommend handling office politics?" Henry considered the question seriously, as if Marcus had asked for genuine counsel rather than venting his frustration. "Patience," he said finally. "And perspective. Sometimes what looks like a setback is actually an opportunity to see things more clearly." "Patience," Marcus repeated skeptically. "Easy advice when you don't have quarterly performance reviews and stock options at stake." "Everyone has something at stake," Henry replied mildly. "The stakes just look different depending on where you're standing." Before Marcus could respond, his phone rang. The caller ID showed his boss's direct line, and he felt his stomach tighten with apprehension. This would be the conversation where he explained his absence and tried to minimize the damage to his reputation. "Excuse me," Marcus said to Henry, stepping away to take the call. "Marcus, where the hell were you this morning?" Richard Blackstone's voice crackled through the phone with barely contained irritation. As Senior Vice President of Development, Blackstone had the power to make or break Marcus's career at Meridian Financial. "Janet had to cover your presentation to the board. Made us look completely unprofessional. I was trapped in an elevator for over an hour," Marcus explained. "Mechanical failure between the 19th and 20th floors. Building maintenance can confirm the timeline." "An elevator," Blackstone repeated, his tone suggesting he found the excuse less than compelling. "Jesus Christ, Marcus. This was supposed to be your moment to shine, your chance to show the board you're ready for bigger responsibilities. Instead, you hand Janet the opportunity on a silver platter." "I understand the optics look bad," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice steady. "But the downtown renovation was my project from the beginning. My research, my contacts, my financial modeling. Janet just delivered my presentation." "That's not how the board sees it," Blackstone replied bluntly. "From their perspective, Janet stepped up when you failed to deliver. She looked professional, prepared, and confident. Those are the qualities we need in leadership positions." Marcus felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. "Are you saying I'm being passed over for the senior VP position?" "I'm saying you need to think about how today affects your trajectory here," Blackstone said. The board was impressed with Janet's presentation. "They're talking about giving her expanded responsibilities, maybe fast-tracking her development. Meanwhile, you're the guy who missed the biggest presentation of his career because of an elevator." The line went dead, leaving Marcus staring at his phone in disbelief. 5 years of 60-hour weeks, of sacrificed weekends and missed family gatherings, of carefully building relationships and delivering results. All of it potentially undone by a mechanical failure and an ambitious colleague's quick thinking. Henry had continued mopping while Marcus took his call, but now he approached with a fresh bucket of water. "Bad news?" he asked gently. "Career-ending news," Marcus replied, his voice hollow with shock. 5 years of work down the drain because I was stuck in an elevator with?" He stopped himself before completing the sentence, but the implication hung in the air between them. "With the janitor," Henry finished quietly. "I understand. From your perspective, this morning was wasted time with someone who doesn't matter." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow, not because they were cruel but because they were so matter-of-fact. Henry wasn't angry or hurt, he was simply stating what they both knew to be true. In Marcus's world, janitors were invisible, irrelevant, the human equivalent of furniture. Their conversations didn't count, their insights didn't matter, their time had no value. "I didn't mean it like that," Marcus said, but even as he spoke the words, he knew they were a lie. He had meant exactly that, and Henry knew it too. "No offense taken," Henry replied, but there was a sadness in his eyes that suggested otherwise. "You should get back to your office. Damage control doesn't do itself." Marcus wanted to say something more, to somehow bridge the gulf that his thoughtless comment had opened between them. But what was there to say? That he respected Henry's dignity despite his menial job? That their conversation had been meaningful even though it had cost him his career? The words would sound patronizing, and they both knew it. Instead, Marcus walked toward the elevator that had caused all his problems, leaving Henry to his mopping. As the doors closed, he caught a final glimpse of the janitor's weathered face, still calm and patient despite the morning's revelations about how little his existence registered in the minds of the building's more important occupants. The ride to the 23rd floor gave Marcus time to compose himself and plan his next moves. He would draft a detailed memo to the board outlining his role in developing the downtown renovation project. He would compile evidence of his contributions, including early drafts and research documents that predated Janet's involvement. He would fight for recognition and, if necessary, make the case that Janet's financial projections were unrealistically optimistic. But even as he planned his counterattack, Marcus couldn't shake the image of Henry's patient acceptance in the face of casual dismissal. The janitor had absorbed insult with the grace of someone who expected nothing better, who had long ago learned to find dignity in work that others considered beneath notice. There was something noble in that acceptance, something that made Marcus's own ambitions seem petty by comparison. His office was exactly as he'd left it that morning, neat, organized, and decorated with the symbols of professional success. His MBA diploma hung on the wall next to a photo of him shaking hands with the mayor at a charity fundraiser. His desk held a crystal paperweight commemorating 5 years of service to Meridian Financial, and his bookshelf displayed titles like Competitive Strategy and The Art of the Deal. Marcus sat in his leather executive chair and stared out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the city skyline. From this height, the streets below looked like abstract patterns, the people reduced to tiny figures scurrying between buildings. It was a perspective that reinforced his sense of importance, his place in the hierarchy of power and influence that governed the city's economic life. His computer chimed with an incoming email from Janet. The subject line read Downtown Renovation, Next Steps, and Marcus felt his jaw clench as he opened the message. "Hi Marcus," the email began with false warmth, "I hope you're feeling better after this morning's elevator incident. The board was very excited about the downtown renovation project, and they've asked me to take the lead on moving forward. I know this was originally your idea, and I want to make sure you receive appropriate recognition for your initial contribution. Perhaps we could meet later this week to discuss how you might continue to be involved in the project's development." The patronizing tone was unmistakable. Janet was offering him a subordinate role in his own project, graciously allowing him to remain involved while she claimed the leadership position and the credit that went with it. She was being careful to acknowledge his initial contribution while making it clear that she now controlled the project's future. Marcus drafted and deleted several responses, each one more confrontational than the last. But ultimately, he realized that any direct challenge would only make him look desperate and petty. Janet had positioned herself skillfully, and the board's positive reaction to her presentation had given her the high ground. Any attempt to reclaim the project would be seen as sour grapes from someone who had failed to show up when it mattered most. The rest of the day passed in a haze of routine tasks and mounting frustration. Colleagues who had previously treated Marcus as a rising star now seemed slightly cooler, more distant. Word of his missed presentation had spread through the office gossip network, and people were beginning to reassess his reliability and future prospects. In the brutal ecosystem of corporate America, perceived weakness was blood in the water, and Marcus could feel the sharks beginning to circle. At 5:30, as the office began to empty for the day, Marcus found himself riding the elevator down to the lobby. He wasn't sure why he was looking for Henry, or what he hoped to accomplish by finding him. Perhaps it was simple curiosity about someone who had witnessed his professional meltdown with such equanimity. Perhaps it was a desire to apologize for his earlier rudeness, though he wasn't sure Henry would care about or accept his apology. He found the janitor in the parking garage, loading his equipment into a battered Ford pickup truck that looked older than some of Marcus's suits. Henry moved with the same quiet efficiency he'd displayed all day, organizing his tools and supplies with practiced precision. "Long day?" Marcus asked, approaching the truck. Henry looked up, surprised to see him. "They all are," he replied simply. "But it's good work. Honest work." "I wanted to apologize," Marcus said, the words coming out in a rush. "For what I said earlier, about wasting time. That was unfair." Henry studied him for a moment, as if trying to determine whether the apology was sincere. "Apology accepted," he said finally. "Though I suspect you're dealing with bigger problems than hurt feelings right now." "How did you know?" 27 years of watching people in this building," Henry replied. "You learn to read the signs. The way someone carries themselves, the look in their eyes. You carrying the weight of disappointment, and it's heavier than you expected." Marcus was struck by the accuracy of the observation. He did feel weighted down, burdened by the collapse of carefully laid plans and the sudden uncertainty about his future. "The project I told you about this morning? My assistant took it over while I was trapped in the elevator. The board loves her version, and now she's positioned to get the promotion I've been working toward for years." "That must be difficult," Henry said with genuine sympathy. "The worst part is that her financial projections are wrong," Marcus continued, surprised by his own need to confess. "She's promising returns that aren't realistic, setting up expectations that can't be met. When the project underperforms, it'll hurt the company and potentially damage the downtown district's redevelopment prospects." Henry nodded thoughtfully. "So what are you going to do about it?" "What can I do?" Marcus asked, frustration evident in his voice. "I can't challenge her directly without looking like a sore loser. And even if I could prove she stole my work, the board has already decided she's more reliable than I am." "Sometimes the best response to injustice is patience," Henry observed. "Time has a way of revealing truth, and people who cut corners usually get caught eventually." "Easy to say when you don't have a mortgage and stock options at stake," Marcus replied, then immediately regretted his harsh tone. "Sorry. I'm not handling this well." "No need to apologize," Henry said mildly. "Financial pressure is real, and it changes how we see our options. But sometimes what looks like the end is actually the beginning of something better." There was something in Henry's tone that suggested personal experience with setbacks and recoveries, but before Marcus could explore the subject further, the janitor had closed his truck's tailgate and was preparing to leave. "See you tomorrow, Mr. Chen," Henry said, climbing into the driver's seat. "Try to get some rest." Marcus watched the pickup truck disappear up the garage ramp, then walked to his own BMW in brooding silence. The luxury sedan felt excessive somehow after witnessing Henry's modest transportation, but Marcus dismissed the feeling as misplaced guilt. He'd worked hard for his success, and there was nothing wrong with enjoying the fruits of his labor. The drive home to his upscale apartment gave Marcus time to think about his situation more objectively. Perhaps Henry was right about patience being the best response. Janet had won this battle, but the war was far from over. If her financial projections proved overly optimistic, the resulting problems could damage her credibility and create an opening for Marcus to reclaim his position. All he needed to do was wait for her to fail. The thought brought him less comfort than he'd expected. Marcus realized he didn't actually want the downtown renovation project to fail, even if it would vindicate his more conservative projections and potentially restore his standing with the board. The project represented something important beyond his personal ambitions, a chance to breathe new life into a neglected part of the city, to preserve architectural heritage while creating economic opportunity. That night, Marcus lay awake thinking about his conversation with Henry and the janitor's simple observation about honest work. There was something enviable in Henry's contentment with his role, his apparent immunity to the status anxiety that drove so much of Marcus's professional life. The janitor seemed to have found dignity in service, purpose in maintaining the building that housed other people's ambitions. Marcus tried to imagine what 27 years of the same routine would feel like. Rising before dawn, coming to work regardless of weather or personal problems, taking pride in clean floors and empty waste paper baskets while the building's more important occupants barely acknowledged his existence. It should have seemed like a waste of human potential, but somehow it didn't. Henry had carved out a meaningful life within narrow constraints, finding satisfaction in work that others considered menial. The next morning brought new complications. Marcus arrived at the office to find an email from the building management company announcing that the downtown renovation project team would be relocated to temporary offices on the 15th floor while their regular space underwent renovations. The timing struck Marcus as suspiciously convenient for Janet, who would now be physically separated from other senior staff members and able to control information flow about the project's development. Marcus spent the day fielding calls from board members who wanted to discuss various aspects of the downtown renovation, calls that were increasingly being redirected to Janet's new office. Each redirected call felt like another nail in the coffin of his professional relevance, another step in his transformation from project leader to forgotten footnote. During his lunch break, Marcus found himself wandering through the building's lower levels, ostensibly checking on some administrative details but actually looking for Henry. He wasn't sure what he hoped to gain from another conversation with the janitor, but Henry's perspective on adversity had been oddly comforting the previous day. He found Henry in the building's mechanical room, performing some sort of maintenance on the HVAC system. The janitor worked with focused concentration, consulting a technical manual and making precise adjustments to various controls. It was a far cry from the simple mopping and cleaning tasks Marcus had assumed comprised the entirety of Henry's responsibilities. "I didn't realize janitorial work involved mechanical systems," Marcus observed, genuinely curious. Henry looked up from his work, wiping his hands on a clean cloth. "Most people don't," he replied. "They see the mop and bucket and assume that's all there is to it. But keeping a 47-story building running smoothly requires a lot of different skills." Marcus studied the complex array of gauges, switches, and monitors that covered the mechanical room walls. The system looked sophisticated enough to require specialized training, not something that could be learned through casual observation. "Did you have experience with this kind of equipment before you started working here?" Marcus asked. "Some," Henry replied, his answer characteristically modest. "You pick up knowledge over the years, take some classes, learn from other people. The building systems have evolved quite a bit since I started, so you either keep learning or get left behind." There was something almost defensive in Henry's tone, as if he was accustomed to having his competence questioned. Marcus realized that his surprise at the janitor's technical skills probably reflected his own prejudices about what kinds of intelligence were required for different types of work. "The building is lucky to have someone with your experience," Marcus said, meaning it sincerely. Henry's expression softened slightly. "Thank you. That's not something I hear very often. Maybe people don't notice everything you do to keep this place running." "Oh, they notice when things go wrong," Henry said with a slight smile. "If the air conditioning fails or the elevators break down, suddenly everyone remembers the janitor exists. But when everything works smoothly, we become invisible again." Marcus was beginning to understand that Henry's philosophical acceptance of his invisible status masked a deeper frustration with being taken for granted. The janitor took pride in his work and clearly possessed skills that went far beyond what most people recognized, but the building's hierarchy ensured that his contributions remained largely unacknowledged. "For what it's worth," Marcus said, "I think yesterday's elevator breakdown taught me something about taking people for granted. I spend so much time focused on my own problems that I forget other people have their own expertise and insights." "Everyone's fighting their own battles," Henry agreed. "The trick is remembering that other people's battles matter too, even when they're not obvious." The conversation was interrupted by Marcus's phone buzzing with an urgent text from his assistant. The board chairman wanted to see him immediately to discuss the downtown renovation project. Marcus felt his pulse quicken with a mixture of hope and anxiety. Perhaps this was his chance to set the record straight and reclaim control of his project. "I have to go," Marcus told Henry. "But thank you for the perspective." "Again." "Good luck, Mr. Chen," Henry replied, returning to his work on the HVAC system. Marcus took the elevator to the 42nd floor, where the board chairman maintained his corner office with panoramic views of the city. Charles Morrison was a man in his 70s who had built his fortune through careful real estate investments and shrewd business deals. His office reflected his success, with antique furniture and original artwork that probably cost more than Marcus's annual salary. "Marcus," Morrison said, gesturing to a chair across from his massive desk. "I wanted to talk to you about this downtown renovation situation." "I appreciate the opportunity to discuss it," Marcus replied, trying to project confidence despite his uncertainty about Morrison's intentions. "Janet's presentation was impressive," Morrison continued, "but some of the board members have raised questions about her financial projections. The returns she's promising seem optimistic, even for a prime location." Marcus felt a surge of vindication. His more conservative analysis was being vindicated, just as Henry had suggested it might be. "I share those concerns," he said carefully. "The downtown district has tremendous potential, but realistic expectations are important for long-term success." Morrison leaned back in his chair, studying Marcus with sharp eyes that had evaluated countless business propositions over the decades. "The project was originally your concept, wasn't it? Before Janet stepped in when you missed the presentation?" "Yes, sir," Marcus confirmed. "I spent months developing the initial proposal, conducting market research, and building relationships with downtown property owners. Janet delivered my presentation when mechanical problems trapped me in an elevator." "So I understand," Morrison said dryly. "Unfortunate timing." "Yes, sir. Very unfortunate." Morrison was quiet for a long moment, apparently weighing his options. "I'm going to be direct with you, Marcus. The board was impressed with Janet's confidence and presentation skills, but several of us have concerns about substance over style. We need someone who understands the complexities of urban redevelopment, not just someone who can deliver a polished presentation." Marcus felt his heart racing with possibility. This was his chance to reclaim the project and salvage his career prospects. "I understand, sir. I believe my approach to the downtown renovation balances ambitious goals with realistic timelines and expectations." "Show me," Morrison said, turning his computer monitor toward Marcus. "I want to see your original analysis, not Janet's version." For the next hour, Marcus walked Morrison through his detailed market research, his careful financial modeling, and his comprehensive development timeline. He explained his rationale for conservative revenue projections and his strategy for phased implementation that would minimize risk while maximizing long-term returns. It was the presentation he should have given to the full board the previous day, and Morrison's questions demonstrated both understanding and appreciation for the thoroughness of Marcus's approach. "This is solid work," Morrison said when Marcus finished. "Much more realistic than what Janet presented yesterday. The question is how we handle the transition back to your leadership without making it look like we are punishing Janet for stepping up when needed." "Perhaps she could remain involved in an important supporting role," Marcus suggested diplomatically. "Her presentation skills are clearly valuable, and teamwork would benefit the project." Morrison smiled slightly. "Spoken like someone who's learned something from adversity. That's exactly the kind of mature approach we need for a project of this complexity." As Marcus left Morrison's office, he felt a mixture of relief and anticipation that he hadn't experienced since before the elevator breakdown. His career wasn't over, it was simply taking an unexpected detour that might ultimately prove beneficial. Henry's advice about patience and perspective had proven remarkably prescient. The rest of the afternoon passed quickly as Marcus began reassembling his downtown renovation team and preparing for the project's next phase. Janet took the news of the transition with professional grace, though Marcus could see her disappointment beneath the polished exterior. He made good on his promise to Morrison by offering her a substantial role in the project's implementation, which she accepted with apparent enthusiasm. That evening, Marcus found himself once again in the building's parking garage, looking for Henry. The janitor's wisdom about patience and perspective had proven valuable, and Marcus wanted to share the good news with someone who would understand its significance. Henry was loading his equipment into his pickup truck with the same methodical precision Marcus had observed the previous evening. The routine seemed comforting in its consistency, a reminder that some things remained constant even when other aspects of life were in flux. "Mr. Chen," Henry said with genuine warmth. "You look like someone who's had a better day." "Much better," Marcus confirmed. "The board chairman called me in to discuss the downtown renovation project. Turns out several board members had concerns about my assistant's overly optimistic projections. They're putting me back in charge of the project." "Congratulations," Henry said, and Marcus could tell he meant it sincerely. "I told you truth has a way of revealing itself eventually." "Your advice about patience was right on target," Marcus acknowledged. "I was ready to go to war yesterday, but waiting turned out to be the better strategy." Henry nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes the best thing you can do is trust that good work will be recognized eventually, even if it takes longer than you'd like." "I wanted to thank you," Marcus said. "Our conversation yesterday helped me gain some perspective on the situation. I don't think I would have handled today's meeting as well without that." "I'm glad I could help," Henry replied simply. "It's not often that someone in your position asks for my opinion about anything more complicated than which floor cleaner works best." Marcus realized that his gratitude represented something unusual in Henry's experience, recognition from someone in the building's power structure that his insights had value beyond his official job description. The thought made Marcus uncomfortable, highlighting how rarely the building's executive class acknowledged the humanity and intelligence of its support staff. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus said. "You seem to know a lot about business and real estate for someone whose job is supposedly just cleaning and maintenance. Have you always worked as a janitor?" Henry was quiet for a long moment, and Marcus wondered if he'd crossed some invisible line with his question. When the older man finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that suggested carefully guarded memories. "Not always," Henry said simply. "I had a different life before I came to work here. But that was a long time ago, and it didn't end well." There was clearly a story behind those words, but Marcus could tell that Henry wasn't ready to share it. The janitor's reluctance suggested painful experiences that he preferred to keep private, and Marcus respected that boundary even as his curiosity deepened. "We all have chapters we'd rather forget," Marcus said diplomatically. "Some chapters," Henry agreed. "But every experience teaches us something, even the ones that hurt. My previous career gave me insights that help me understand what goes on in this building, even if most people assume I'm too ignorant to comprehend their world." Marcus heard the slight edge in Henry's voice, a hint of frustration at being consistently underestimated because of his current position. It occurred to him that Henry might be overqualified for his janitorial role, but circumstances had somehow led him to accept work that was beneath his capabilities. "Well, your insights have been valuable to me," Marcus said. "More valuable than a lot of expensive consultants I've worked with." Henry smiled at that. "I appreciate hearing that. It's been a long time since anyone sought my advice on business matters." As Henry climbed into his pickup truck and prepared to leave, Marcus found himself wondering about the janitor's mysterious past. What kind of career could have given him such sophisticated understanding of real estate development and corporate politics? And what had happened to force him into accepting work that clearly didn't challenge his abilities? The questions nagged at Marcus throughout the evening and into the next day. During breaks between meetings about the downtown renovation project, he found himself seeking out Henry and engaging in conversations that revealed more of the janitor's unexpected depth. Henry's comments about zoning regulations were informed by detailed knowledge of municipal law. His observations about construction costs reflected familiarity with industry standards and regional variations. His understanding of historical preservation requirements suggested experience with actual renovation projects. Gradually, Marcus began to piece together a picture of someone whose current position was wildly inconsistent with his background and abilities. But Henry deflected direct questions about his past with polite but firm boundaries, making it clear that certain topics were not open for discussion. The downtown renovation project moved forward rapidly under Marcus's renewed leadership. His realistic timeline and conservative financial projections earned praise from board members who had grown skeptical of Janet's more ambitious promises. The project's early phases progressed smoothly, with property acquisitions and initial permits proceeding according to schedule. Marcus found himself increasingly grateful for the elevator breakdown that had initially seemed so catastrophic. The forced conversation with Henry had provided not only valuable perspective on handling adversity but also an unexpected friendship that enriched his daily experience in the building. He began making a point of seeking out the janitor for brief conversations, finding Henry's quiet wisdom a welcome antidote to the competitive pressures of executive life. But it was during the project's third month that Marcus stumbled upon information that completely transformed his understanding of his janitor friend. He was reviewing historical documents related to the downtown district's previous development attempts when he found a newspaper article from 30 years earlier that made him stop breathing. The headline read, "A local developer's empire collapses in real estate crash," and the accompanying photograph showed a much younger Henry Rodriguez standing in front of a half-constructed building, his face etched with defeat and exhaustion. The article described how Rodriguez's ambitious downtown development company had overextended itself during the real estate boom of the early 1990s, leaving him bankrupt when the market crashed. Marcus read the article 3 times, absorbing details that painted a picture of spectacular rise and catastrophic fall. Henry Rodriguez had been one of the city's most prominent developers, responsible for several major projects that had transformed entire neighborhoods. His company had employed hundreds of workers and generated millions in revenue before economic forces beyond his control brought everything crashing down. The article mentioned that Rodriguez had lost not only his business but also his personal assets, including a mansion in the city's most exclusive neighborhood and a portfolio of investment properties worth tens of millions of dollars. Creditors had seized everything, leaving him with nothing but bankruptcy papers and the bitter knowledge that his ambitious vision had exceeded his ability to execute it safely. Marcus sat in his office, staring at the 30-year-old photograph and trying to reconcile the successful developer described in the article with the humble janitor he'd grown to respect and appreciate. Henry hadn't just suffered a career setback, he'd experienced total financial and professional devastation on a scale that few people could comprehend, let alone survive. The revelation explained so much about Henry's sophisticated understanding of real estate development and his philosophical approach to adversity. He wasn't speaking from theoretical knowledge when he offered advice about patience and perspective, he was drawing from personal experience with failure and recovery that dwarfed anything Marcus had ever faced. But it also raised uncomfortable questions about the building that housed Meridian Financial Holdings. If Henry had been one of the city's major developers 30 years ago, what was he doing working as a janitor in a building that? Marcus felt his blood turn cold as the implications began to register. He spent the rest of the afternoon conducting research that confirmed his growing suspicions. Property records showed that the building housing Meridian Financial had been constructed in the late 1980s by Rodriguez Development Corporation. The architectural style and luxury amenities matched the description of Henry's flagship project, designed to attract premium tenants and serve as the crown jewel of his development empire. But the records also showed something else that made Marcus's head spin with disbelief. Following Rodriguez Development Corporation's bankruptcy, the building had been seized by creditors and eventually sold at auction to a shell company whose ownership was buried in layers of legal complexity. But after an hour of following paper trails through corporate records and property transfers, Marcus discovered something that defied all logic and understanding. The building was currently owned by HR Holdings, LLC, a company registered to one Henry Rodriguez. Marcus stared at his computer screen, reading the ownership documents over and over again as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. According to the records, Henry hadn't just worked in the building for 27 years, he had owned it for the past 15 years, having somehow reacquired the property through the shell company that had purchased it from his creditors. The janitor who cleaned the floors and emptied the waste paper baskets owned the 47-story office tower that housed some of the city's most prestigious financial firms. The man who had been dismissed and ignored by executives like Marcus was actually their landlord, quietly collecting rent from companies that probably had no idea who their actual lessor was. Marcus's mind raced as he tried to understand the implications of this discovery. Henry had not only survived his spectacular bankruptcy but had somehow engineered a comeback that allowed him to reacquire his most significant asset. But instead of returning to his former life as a prominent developer, he had chosen to remain anonymous, working as the building's janitor while his tenants treated him as if he were invisible. The more Marcus thought about it, the more questions multiplied in his mind. How had Henry managed to accumulate the resources necessary to buy back his building? Why had he chosen to maintain his cover as a janitor rather than reclaim his former status? And most importantly, what did this mean for Marcus's own relationship with someone he had initially dismissed as irrelevant? That evening, Marcus found himself once again in the parking garage, but this time his motivations were entirely different. He wasn't looking for comfort or advice, he was seeking answers to questions that had turned his understanding of reality upside down. Henry was performing his usual end-of-day ritual, loading equipment into his pickup truck with the same methodical precision that had characterized all their previous encounters. But now Marcus saw everything differently. The truck wasn't the modest transportation of a working-class man, it was the deliberately humble choice of someone who had reasons for avoiding attention. Henry's calm patience wasn't the acceptance of someone with limited options, it was the confidence of someone who controlled more than anyone realized. "Mr. Chen," Henry said, noticing Marcus's approach. "You look like someone who's discovered something unexpected." The observation was so accurate that Marcus wondered if Henry had been expecting this conversation. "I found an interesting newspaper article today," Marcus said carefully. "From about 30 years ago. About a developer named Henry Rodriguez who lost everything in the real estate crash." Henry's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "That must have been quite a story," he said neutrally. "It was," Marcus confirmed. "But the really interesting discovery came when I started researching building ownership records. Turns out this building is owned by HR Holdings, LLC. Registered to Henry Rodriguez." Now Henry's facade cracked slightly, revealing something that might have been relief. "I wondered when someone would make that connection," he said quietly. 27 years is a long time to maintain a cover story." "Cover story?" Marcus repeated. "You've been pretending to be a janitor for 27 years?" "Not pretending," Henry corrected. "I really am a janitor. I really do clean floors and empty trash cans and maintain mechanical systems. But yes, I also happen to own the building where I work." Marcus felt as if he were having a conversation in an alternate universe where nothing made sense according to the rules he'd always accepted. "Why?" he asked simply. Henry leaned against his pickup truck, apparently deciding that the time for secrets had passed. "When my development company collapsed, I lost everything. My business, my houses, my reputation, my sense of who I was. The bankruptcy was so complete that I couldn't even get a job in real estate anymore. Nobody would hire someone who'd failed that spectacularly." "So you became a janitor?" "I needed work, and this building needed someone who understood its systems," Henry explained. "I'd designed and constructed it, so I knew every pipe and wire and ventilation duct. The management company was happy to hire someone with that kind of familiarity, especially at janitor wages." Marcus was beginning to understand the logic, but the full picture still eluded him. "How did you end up owning it again?" Henry smiled ruefully. "Patience and perspective, as I've mentioned before. I spent 15 years learning everything I could about the building's financial performance, the rental market, the maintenance costs, the capital improvement needs. I lived like a monk, saving every penny and reinvesting it carefully. When the opportunity came to buy back my building, I was ready." "But why continue working as a janitor once you owned it again?" "Because nobody expects the owner to be mopping floors," Henry replied. As a janitor, I'm invisible. I can observe how tenants really behave, what their actual needs are, what problems they are afraid to report to management. I can understand the building's operational reality in ways that would be impossible from an executive suite. Marcus realized that Henry's position as janitor wasn't just a cover story, it was an intelligence operation that gave him unprecedented insight into his own property. He knew which companies were thriving and which were struggling, which tenants were considering relocation and which were planning expansion. He had access to information that most building owners could only dream of obtaining. The elevator breakdown, Marcus said, pieces clicking into place. You knew exactly how long the repair would take because you control the maintenance schedule. 90 minutes seemed like enough time for us to have a meaningful conversation, Henry confirmed with a slight smile. You looked like someone who needed perspective on what really matters in life. Marcus felt simultaneously impressed and manipulated. Henry had orchestrated their encounter, using mechanical problems as an excuse to engage in the kind of deep conversation that would have been impossible under normal circumstances. But the advice and insights had been genuine, and the outcome had ultimately benefited Marcus's career and personal growth. So when I was complaining about my problems to you, Marcus said slowly, you were listening as someone who'd experienced real catastrophic failure and rebuilt from nothing. Everyone's problems are real to them, Henry replied diplomatically. Your career concerns weren't trivial just because I'd faced different challenges. But yes, I had some perspective on recovery from setbacks that seemed relevant to your situation. Marcus thought about all their conversations over the past several months, reframing every exchange in light of this new understanding. Henry's insights about corporate politics hadn't come from casual observation, they'd come from someone who had once played the game at the highest levels. His advice about patience and persistence reflected hard-won wisdom about the long-term nature of real success. Does anyone else know? Marcus asked. The building's management company knows they report to HR Holdings, but they don't know Henry Rodriguez the janitor and Henry Rodriguez the owner are the same person, Henry explained. I conduct business through lawyers and accountants who maintain the corporate veil. As far as most people are concerned, I'm just the invisible man who keeps the building running. Marcus was struck by the elaborate lengths Henry had gone to maintain his anonymity. The man had constructed an entirely separate identity that allowed him to operate at two completely different levels simultaneously. It was either brilliant or insane, and Marcus wasn't sure which. Why are you telling me this now? Marcus asked. Henry considered the question carefully. Because you've shown me respect and genuine friendship over the past few months, he said finally. Not because you knew I was anything other than a janitor, but because you recognized something worthwhile in me regardless of my position. That's rare, and it deserves honesty in return. The words hit Marcus harder than he'd expected. He realized that his friendship with Henry had indeed developed based on personal qualities rather than professional status. The janitor's wisdom, patience, and dignity had been valuable regardless of his hidden wealth and power. In fact, Henry's willingness to maintain humble employment while secretly controlling a vast asset demonstrated character traits that Marcus found more impressive than conventional success. What happens now? Marcus asked. Do we pretend this conversation never happened? That's up to you, Henry replied. I'd prefer to continue our friendship, but I understand if this changes how you see me. Some people have trouble with cognitive dissonance when their assumptions about social hierarchy get challenged. Marcus thought about Henry's observation. The revelation did challenge his assumptions about success, failure, and the relationship between social status and personal worth. But it also validated his growing appreciation for Henry's character and insights. The man had demonstrated remarkable resilience, intelligence, and humility in ways that transcended conventional categories. I'd like to continue our friendship, Marcus said. Though I have to admit, I'm going to need some time to process all this. Take all the time you need, Henry said with genuine warmth. I've been keeping this secret for 15 years, so I'm not in any hurry to change the arrangement. As Henry climbed into his pickup truck and prepared to leave, Marcus realized that their relationship had entered entirely new territory. He was no longer the successful executive offering charity to the humble janitor. They were peers who had both experienced professional challenges and found ways to move forward with dignity intact. The revelation about Henry's true identity had implications that extended far beyond their personal friendship. Marcus found himself wondering how many other assumptions he'd made about people based on their apparent positions rather than their actual capabilities. How many valuable insights had he missed because he'd dismissed their sources as irrelevant? Over the following weeks, Marcus found his perspective on workplace relationships fundamentally altered. He began paying attention to maintenance staff, security guards, and administrative assistants in ways that would have been unimaginable just months earlier. He discovered that many of these supposedly invisible employees possessed knowledge and experience that could be valuable if anyone bothered to ask for their input. The downtown renovation project benefited significantly from Marcus's expanded perspective. He began consulting with construction workers about practical implementation challenges, asking security personnel about pedestrian traffic patterns, and seeking input from cleaning staff about maintenance requirements that could affect long-term operational costs. The project's success metrics improved measurably as a result of incorporating insights from people whose expertise had previously been ignored. Meanwhile, his friendship with Henry deepened as they found new ways to communicate that acknowledged the janitor's dual identity without compromising his cover. They developed a subtle code that allowed them to discuss building ownership and management issues during their casual conversations, with Henry occasionally offering suggestions that Marcus could present as his own insights to building management. It was during one of these conversations that Henry revealed another surprise that demonstrated the depth of his strategic thinking. The downtown renovation project that had launched Marcus's career recovery was taking place in buildings that Henry also owned through various shell companies. Marcus's carefully researched property acquisitions had unknowingly been negotiated with his janitor friend, who had deliberately offered favorable terms to ensure the project's success. "You've been helping me succeed this entire time," Marcus realized during a late evening conversation in the parking garage. "The property deals, the renovation permits, even the elevator breakdown that started our friendship. How much of my career recovery was actually orchestrated by you?" Henry smiled at the question. "I prefer to think of it as removing obstacles rather than orchestrating outcomes," he said diplomatically. "You had good ideas and strong work ethic. I just made sure those qualities got the recognition they deserved." Marcus wasn't sure whether to feel grateful or manipulated. Henry's intervention had certainly saved his career and enabled the downtown renovation project to move forward successfully. But it also meant that his professional recovery hadn't been entirely based on merit and persistence, as he'd believed. "Why?" Marcus asked. "Why go to such lengths to help someone you barely knew?" Henry's expression grew thoughtful. "Because you reminded me of myself 30 years ago," he said finally. "Ambitious, hardworking, convinced that success was just a matter of having the right strategy and putting in enough effort. I saw you heading toward the same kind of fall I experienced, and I wanted to help you find a different path." "What kind of fall?" "The fall that comes from thinking your worth is determined by your position in some artificial hierarchy," Henry explained. "I spent 20 years climbing the ladder of professional success, accumulating wealth and status and influence. But when it all collapsed, I discovered that none of those external achievements had made me a better person or created meaningful relationships or provided genuine satisfaction." Marcus thought about his own pre-elevator priorities, the relentless focus on promotions and salary increases, the careful cultivation of relationships based on their potential career benefits, the assumption that success meant accumulating symbols of professional achievement. Henry was suggesting that this entire framework was fundamentally flawed. "So working as a janitor while secretly owning the building is your way of rejecting that hierarchy?" Marcus asked. "It's my way of understanding what really matters," Henry corrected. "When people think you're invisible, they reveal their true character. I've learned more about human nature in 27 years of janitorial work than I did in 20 years of corporate deal-making." Marcus realized that Henry's unusual position had given him a unique laboratory for studying human behavior. The janitor saw people at their most unguarded, observed how they treated those they perceived as inferior, witnessed the gap between public personas and private character. It was an education that no MBA program could provide. "And what have you learned?" Marcus asked. Henry considered the question carefully. "That kindness and respect have nothing to do with social status," he said finally. "Some of the building's wealthiest tenants treat me with genuine courtesy, while others act as if I don't exist. The difference isn't in their bank accounts, it's in their character." Marcus winced, remembering his own initial behavior toward Henry. The janitor's patient acceptance of casual dismissal suddenly seemed less like resignation and more like a test of character that Marcus had initially failed but eventually passed. "I wasn't very kind to you at first," Marcus acknowledged. "No," Henry agreed without answer. "But you learned and grew. That's what made our friendship possible." Their conversations continued over the following months as the downtown renovation project approached completion. Marcus found himself increasingly grateful not just for Henry's practical assistance but for the philosophical framework the janitor had provided for thinking about success, failure, and human worth. The lessons went far beyond career strategy, touching on fundamental questions about how to live a meaningful life. The project's success exceeded even Marcus's conservative projections, earning praise from city officials and attracting national attention as a model for urban redevelopment. Marcus received a promotion to senior vice president and found himself being recruited by larger firms that wanted to capitalize on his apparent expertise in downtown revitalization. But the professional recognition, while satisfying, no longer seemed like the most important outcome of the previous year's events. Marcus realized that his friendship with Henry had taught him to value character over status, genuine connection over strategic networking, and personal growth over external validation. These lessons had made him not just more successful but also more fulfilled. It was during the downtown renovation project's grand opening celebration that Marcus faced a moment of truth that would define both his future and his friendship with Henry. The mayor was present, along with prominent business leaders and media representatives who had come to celebrate the district's transformation. Marcus was scheduled to deliver a speech about the project's success and his vision for future development. As he stood at the podium, looking out at the assembled crowd, Marcus caught sight of Henry quietly emptying trash receptacles in the background. The janitor worked with his usual efficiency, invisible to the celebrated guests who were praising Marcus's leadership and strategic vision. None of them knew that the modest man in the maintenance uniform was actually the project's silent partner, the property owner whose cooperation had made the entire renovation possible. Marcus felt a moment of crystalline clarity about the choice before him. He could deliver his prepared remarks, accept full credit for the project's success, and continue building his career on a foundation that included Henry's hidden contributions. Or he could tell the truth about the partnership that had made the renovation possible, revealing Henry's identity and giving credit where it was actually due. The decision required only seconds of consideration. Marcus set aside his prepared speech and began to tell a different story, one about the importance of recognizing unsung contributions, about the wisdom that could be found in unexpected places, and about the building owner who had disguised himself as a janitor in order to better serve his tenants' needs. The revelation sent shockwaves through the assembled crowd. Business leaders who had ignored Henry for years suddenly found themselves face to face with someone who controlled more real estate than most of them could imagine. The mayor, who had been praising Marcus's vision, realized that the actual visionary was standing quietly in the corner with a trash bag in his hands. Henry's reaction to Marcus's disclosure was characteristically composed. When called upon to address the crowd, he spoke briefly about the importance of preserving architectural heritage while meeting modern needs, about the value of long-term thinking in development projects, and about the lessons that could be learned by observing rather than assuming. His remarks were thoughtful and informed, befitting someone with his actual experience and position. The aftermath of Marcus's revelation transformed both men's professional lives in ways neither had fully anticipated. Henry found himself reluctantly returned to prominence as a developer and property owner, though he insisted on maintaining his janitorial duties as a way of staying connected to the operational realities of his buildings. Marcus discovered that his willingness to share credit and acknowledge others' contributions made him more respected rather than less, leading to consulting opportunities that drew on his experience with collaborative development approaches. But perhaps more importantly, their friendship deepened as it was finally conducted in full honesty. Marcus no longer had to pretend that Henry's insights came from casual observation, and Henry no longer had to maintain the fiction that he was just a simple janitor with surprising wisdom. They could discuss business challenges and opportunities as peers, drawing on their complementary experiences with success, failure, and recovery. The downtown renovation project became a case study in business schools, not just for its financial success but for its innovative approach to stakeholder collaboration. Marcus was frequently asked to speak about the lessons learned, and he always emphasized the importance of recognizing expertise regardless of its source and the value of genuine partnerships that transcended conventional hierarchies. Years later, as Marcus reflected on the chain of events that had begun with a broken elevator, he realized that the mechanical failure had been the best thing that ever happened to his career. Not because it led to professional success, though it certainly had, but because it taught him to see people as individuals rather than positions, to value character over status, and to understand that wisdom could be found in the most unexpected places. Henry continued working as a janitor even as his property empire expanded and his development expertise became widely recognized. When asked about this unusual arrangement, he would simply explain that the best way to understand any business was to experience it from the ground up, literally. His buildings became known for their exceptional maintenance, satisfied tenants, and innovative approaches to sustainable operation. The friendship between Marcus and Henry became something of a legend within the city's business community, often cited as an example of how genuine relationships could transcend artificial barriers of class and status. They continued to meet in the parking garage each evening, their conversations ranging from practical matters of building management to philosophical questions about the nature of success and fulfillment. Marcus never forgot the lesson of that first elevator conversation, and that the most valuable insights often came from the most unexpected sources, and that treating everyone with respect and genuine interest was not just ethically right but practically wise. The janitor who had seemed irrelevant had turned out to be the most important mentor of his professional life, teaching him lessons that no amount of formal education could have provided. And Henry, for his part, found satisfaction in knowing that his unconventional approach to business and life had helped at least one person avoid the mistakes that had once cost him everything. The janitor's uniform became a symbol not of failure or diminished status, but of wisdom earned through experience and the strength to rebuild from nothing while maintaining one's essential humanity. In the end, they had both learned that true success wasn't measured by titles or salaries or social recognition, but by the quality of one's character and the positive impact one could have on others' lives. The building continued to run smoothly under their collaborative stewardship, its elevators carrying people between floors while its two most important occupants proved that worth and wisdom could be found at any level, if only one had the patience and perspective to look.